Mr. Mayor, dear friends, good morning. Something which is in common with the Finnish and Icelandic languages is that you can be absolutely sure that no one understands a word. So far I haven't understood anything, but I enjoyed the nice pictures, to be honest. But actually that is not a big problem. It's not either a problem that I don't understand my topic. Which reminds me, as a former politician, that some politicians are actually quite well known of having the answers even if they don't know the question. This is a true story. I mean, the former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was actually quite well known for this one. And then one beautiful day, and this is a true story, she went to an online interview of BBC, and the journalist decided to make a practical joke. And he started the interview by asking, Madam Prime Minister, what is your answer to the first question? She didn't get confused at all, and she told about all the good things her government is doing. And then she found out that the journalist actually got quite confused. Then she asked, do you want to have the answer to the second question as well? I don't know what the first and second question here is for me. I think that I'm invited here because Helsinki, and maybe also Finland, is a quite good example of a quite balanced, good housing situation. So as mentioned, I think so. I'm the former mayor of Helsinki. I spent 4 years there. Also the former Minister of Housing in Finland. I spent 4 years as a minister. So I have been working with housing issues for 8 years. But I'm still not a specialist. That was not my role. You are the specialists, you are the experts. My role was to lead housing policy in the country and in the city. And what I'm now trying to tell you is some experiences of what it is to lead housing policy in a, I suppose so, in a quite successful way. I'd like to start with the, I think, most important one. A vision without proper action is just a dream. Action without a proper vision is just entertainment. What changes world is a action which is aligned with the vision. I have seen so many politicians with a lot of visions, but no understanding of how to execute it. And I have seen so many politicians who are eager to execute without having a vision at all. Especially when we are talking about, I think, like housing, which is an extremely complex issue. You need to have a proper vision, and then you need to be loyal to that and execute. Coming back to politicians, we are eager on starting with the answers. But it's more important to start with the question. What is the most important question? I think that the most important question is, what are your primary goals? What are your primary goals concerning housing? I'm sure that even this audience has at least 5, maybe 10 different answers. I mean, it could be just housing people, handling growth, which is a quite typical case in most bigger cities. It could be affordability. It's not only about the volume of housing, it's also the price that people need to afford it. It could be sustainability. It could be sustainability on a building size, energy efficiency, or it could be fight against urban sprawl. It could be safety. It could be unobstructed. I mean, we are also a city for handicapped people, and we are a city in a world where people are aging. It could be competitiveness. We maybe want to have a housing market which is also lucrative for foreign talents. It could be fighting segregation. It could be fighting loneliness. It could be to try to meet people's preferences. What is it? What's your primary goal? You may choose one of those, you may choose 2, 3, 4. I dare to say that it's a combination of all of those. It needs to be at least those, and maybe 5 or 6 or 7 other objectives as well. It's not easy. Let's take, for example, affordability. If you talk about affordability for the most vulnerable people, you most probably concentrate on social housing, subsidized social housing. But if you talk about affordable housing and actually attainable housing for lower middle class people, then you most probably not talk about subsidized housing, but the volume, because the main problem which leads to too high prices is that the demand is higher than the supply, and for a long time. So you need to have more supply in order to balance the housing market. Then this could also be contradictory. Let's take just housing people and fighting segregation. One reason why we in Helsinki have been able to fight segregation in a successful way is that we have not allowed it to cheap construction. We just don't allow it because we want to fight segregation. But the other side of the coin is that because we do not do that, we also limit the volume of how much is built, which then creates some challenges on the other side. Then my main point is that driving housing policy, being responsible for that, you need to understand that it's not only and primarily not about your homes, it's about your lives. It's a totally different story if you have your focus on the homes or on your lives. Then you need to understand that there are several specificities in the housing market. I remember as Minister of Housing, one of my problems was that we did not have that many construction companies in Finland. It was an oligopolistic market, and I wanted to have more competition. I remember I made a trip to Japan. I met 4 really huge construction companies. I told my story to them and asked them whether you would like to come to Finland. They all replied, no way. The first reason, it's too small market. It's quite much bigger than Iceland, but anyhow, it's a small market. And the other one is that the barriers for entry in the construction market are so high, everywhere, especially in smaller markets. So I needed to play with the cards which I had. There are some other specificities as well in the housing market if you compare it for producing toothbrushes or even cars. The one is that we have a limited amount of land, and we have a limited amount of land which is suitable and accessible for housing. Every spot is unique. This is an industry which is not scalable in a same way than most other products in the market economy are. And what is maybe most important is that you have really a long time span here. When you build something, you are stuck with what you have done for maybe the next 30 years. One of the most important things you need to understand is that you need to have a comprehensive approach. Coming back to the question of your lives, it was Aristotle who said already 2,300 years ago that people come into cities in order to get a job and earn their living, but they stay there in order to live a good life. That was a core of a city for 2,300 years ago, and it still is the same. You need to have a holistic view. And you also need to understand, and I don't know Reykjavik that well, but you know to understand that it's a regional issue, housing. What we did in Finland, which was quite successful for 15 years ago roughly, that we started to make concrete agreements between the state, I mean the federal government, several ministries, as well as all the 14 municipalities we have in the Helsinki region. 4 years agreement. How many houses are we going to have? How many in that city, how many in that city, how many in that city? How much of them are social? We decided that 20% of everything needs to be social. And then we decided even that most of the new construction should be placed on railways, different kind of railways. The first 4 years, it did create some results. The next 4 years, a little bit more. Now we have done it in 16 years, and now it's a part of our success story. We have a common understanding of what we are doing, how much, what kind, and where. It's still not simple, because we can't, of course, know what happens in the markets. But I mean that the public sector has a common understanding of what we should do is the basis for everything, and really having a comprehensive approach. It's only the city who can have the overall responsibility of what's happening within the borders of a city. But at the same time, it's important to understand that we are dependent on the markets, that the markets are more efficient and more innovative than the public sector ever can be. So we need a good cooperation between the public and private sector. I dare to say that those places which have the most successful outcome of their housing policy are those who have the best public-private partnership models. You need to understand, and you need to give as much freedom to the markets as possible, but at the same time, you need to understand, and I say this as a center-right politician or former center-right politician, that there is a lot of market failures. And that's why you also need intervention by the public sector and regulation. There are politicians who believe more in free markets and less in regulation, and there are politicians who believe more in regulation and less in free markets. It needs to be a pragmatic combination of both of these. I'll give you 2 examples, a good one and a bad one from Helsinki. Starting from the market failure. What is the market failure? The first one, it could be too little affordable housing, too much segregation. What we did in Helsinki? We decided that 25% of all new construction needs to be subsidized social non-profit. And another 25%, like half subsidized, half, and only 50% free. And not, I mean, on city level, but on neighborhood level. In every single neighborhood, 25% needs to be social, and another 25% like semi-social. That is not, I mean, something you should copy everywhere, but it was a consistent policy which we did in order to fight segregation, and we did it in a successful way. That was a good example. A bad example which we also had was that we found out that because the markets do not function properly, and if you have a situation where we have a chronic situation where the demand is higher than the supply, the markets try to optimize. And they try to optimize in a way that they build only houses in which the profitability is the highest. And that led in our city in a system that they built very small buildings, very small apartments. Which was, I mean, of course there were demand for that, but it was a problem at the same time. And we decided that we don't want to have a downtown Helsinki with only really small apartments. And that's why we decided to regulate the average size of the dwellings, which was a wrong decision, because it led to a very boring city with the market sub-optimizing once again. Then we shifted it to a regulation where some amount of the new dwellings need to be for one person families, some percentage of a little of 2 maybe person households, and then some percentage of the big families. And that then led to a relatively good outcome. Then it's a question of subsidizing what and how. I won't stay here for a long time, but I just give you some examples. You can decide that you subsidize construction or everyday living. Which one do you think is better? You can decide that you subsidize rental apartments or owned dwellings. You can use taxation or you can use direct subsidies. What is the best way to do it? I don't know. It depends. Depends from place to place. We in Helsinki, we use all of those. It's a combination of all of those. But you need to understand that they all have different kind of effect, and they have a different kind of logics. I don't think there is any city in the world which has a, really balanced, good housing situation. You have problems everywhere. It is a really complex issue. You have different goals in different cities. We started with asking what is the primary goal. I don't know what's your idea now. My idea is still that it's a combination of everything. But you have cases, successful cases, where it's much more simple. I give you an example. The founding fathers of Singapore decided that the primary goal of their housing is that everyone needs to own their own flat. Everyone. You know why? Because it was a small, young nation having some big, maybe not that friendly neighbors, and they thought that the best way to get your people committed to defend your own country is that you own something there, which you can't export. That was a success story in Singapore. Now, 50, 60 years afterwards, they have a balanced goods housing market where more or less everyone owns their flat. Then, of course, you have different problems in different cities. But to wrap up, I think you can't underline too much the fact that you need to know what you're doing. Another way to put it is that you should lead by strategy and lead by data. You need to know the situation and you need to have a clear vision where you're going. And if you want to be successful, then, and this is the most difficult part, then you need to be consistent. I don't know, may you know certainly, how many dwellings you have in Reykjavik. And then you know how many new ones you build every year. It's maybe between 1 or 2%, let me say. The renewal rate of your housing block is maybe 2% per year. So whatever politicians do, they can make a 2% difference in a year. That's not too much. Maybe if you have a term, it could be up to 8%. Even that is not much. If you really want to be successful, you need to have several mandate periods in a row following more or less same policy. And that is the secret behind at least what we are doing in Helsinki. Of course we have elections, of course parties, they have different kind of views, but not that different. So we follow more or less the same policy, independent on the outcome of the elections. So, proper evaluation of your situation, clear targets, which are anchored in the city strategy, strong commitment to your action plan, comprehensive and regional approach, good public-private partnership, and then, of course, also every now and then some innovative new solutions. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not rocket science. This is much more difficult. It's much more complicated. I mean, if you are clever enough, you know how to build a rocket. But no one has never, ever really succeeded to make perfect housing market. Because there are so many different elements of that, which only underlines what I said: comprehensive approach, consistency, and so on. You need to will to solve problems. You need to be good in implementing and executing, something which I haven't tackled that much here. And what you don't need, and I say this as a former politician. I spent 12 years in the Finnish parliament, 7 years as a minister, and 4 years as a mayor. What you don't need too much party politics. Thank you.